Warning, the following video has flashing lights and also includes content that may be deemed inappropriate for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Dr. Dennis Carroll. I see. Once again, you have called upon me and decided it was time to summon more powerful resources to deal with something you and I must attend to. I do enjoy feeding time. I could sit here all night and indulge myself. Yet unfortunately for me, Dr. Carroll has released my shackles, not to feed, but to hunt. Yes, hunt the creatures of the night.
Stood up. I said, oh my god, it's a werewolf. And everybody in the car freaked out.
My creatures of the night. Yes, once again, you are tuning in to another episode of Midnight Lycanthropy here on StarFox Radio. It is again time to link up with the Midnight Society science team. Dennis Carroll is again sitting around the late night fire as we burn the timber into the early hours of the morning in an attempt to figure out what is occurring with strange owls, missing people, and unidentifiable creatures. Dennis, how you been, man?
Good. How you doing? It's a good dark, foggy night for a session by the campfire with a Midnight Society, my man.
Appreciate you, and just been really busy editing like you have been, and just trying to get my content out, and just watching a bunch of interesting stuff that I've been learning. Pretty cool. What about you, man? What have you been up to?
Absolutely. It's good to stay on a lot of the social media and see what's going on, see some of the stuff people are putting up. It helps a little bit in research. But your main research is going to be either libraries or the libraries on your internet. I know over the years, many years ago before the internet, many hours alone in the rooms of libraries doing research and looking up different type of records and things like that. So it's amazing now that we have the library of the world at our fingertips.
Yes, it is some pretty legendary stuff for sure. I just enjoy learning in general. I'm always trying to watch something that's at least educational, even if it's about, per se, like the Sasquatch or something. Just learning about the anatomy and the historical aspects and some of the potential ancestors. All super interesting. Don't get me wrong. Every once in a while, I find myself watching in the background a cheese ball creature feature film, and I actually just watched one called Operation Blood Hunt, which is a new werewolf movie on Tubi. The werewolves look awesome, but It's not bad if you take it for what it is. The atmosphere and stuff is cool. Yeah, it's still, like I said, a B flick. So I find that to be humorous. But that's pretty much the only time I find myself watching something, I guess, senseless, if that makes sense. No pun intended.
I'll tell you what I've been doing, my friend. I've been doing a lot of research on the relation of Bigfoot and Dogman to ancient history. And it's fascinating. This is another rabbit hole that we definitely need to go down. And it may lead from ancient history to off-world places and stuff like that. It's very interesting stuff.
Yes, that is very interesting. Well, I take it that is what you have been diving into lately. I did see you link up with Jessica a little while ago, which is awesome. But yes, to the audience, Dennis, as always, has some really interesting information for us. I am going to toss you the mic if you'd like to get us rolling, my friend.
Yes, that was a great show I did with Jessica, and I did it. I'm still getting feedback on it, as a matter of fact. We did the Anderson, South Carolina. That's where I live. It's the hometown I live in. We have a werewolf here thing, and I did a show with her on just that. And if any of you missed that, you need to check it out because it's very fascinating stuff. But yes, my neighborhood has its own werewolf, and it's not me. Okay, but um, it's very interesting. But I'm still getting some good feedback on that. It's a fascinating story.
Yes, that's some pretty legendary stuff right there for sure. And Jessica and yourself always put out great content. I will have the links up to your page, and everyone can find Jessica's page through all the episodes her and I have done together, or it's a pretty easy search, or you can just look at my Midnight Society suggestion list down bottom. And I mean, Dennis is up there as well. It's pretty easy to track you down and keep up to date with what's been rolling. When it comes to werewolves and things and dogmen and devil monkeys lately, a lot of members of our science team have been diving into some pretty interesting aspects, that's for sure. We're beginning to think there's a lot with primates involved as well too, and potential hyenas. Interesting stuff, but what have you been diving into?
Well, like I said, I've been studying the relation of Bigfoot, especially Dogman, to ancient history. Alexander the Great supposedly ran into a whole society of dog-headed men. I think they were in the hills of India, the hills and mountains of India. And here's the interesting thing, of course, when you have mountains, you're going to definitely have caves. And they're supposed to be connected to cave systems, these dog-headed people. And so these men actually supposedly ran into these, and actually supposedly had an episode with a dragon in a cave too, by the way. But it's very fascinating. I invite people to look at some of the fascinating records that Alexander the Great's people. He had people who record this stuff, and so since he didn't have the media like we have today, like we're talking on right here, he had scribes to record things that happened, and it's fascinating stuff. But this is very goes back into ancient history, and I have to wonder, about the dog-headed people. Could these be some of the precursors of what we know as Dogman today? And of course, there is a hypothesis out there again that some of these things, especially like Dogman, and maybe even Bigfoot as well, could be some type of scouting parties sent out by aliens, if you want to call them that, or off-world people, for certain things, to find out certain things, that what they're doing is not just living and existing as they're getting data from them, supposedly, as scouting parties. That's a wild hypothesis to think about, too.
Yeah, that is some super awesome and interesting stuff for sure. Have you ever heard this aspect? Because personally, I spent a lot more time on the prehistoric and modern day predators, etc., and where I think the baboons and hyenas are falling into certain aspects of play. Yeah, have you ever heard this along your journeys that there's a hypothesis, and I don't even know if you can call it a theory, that these werewolves or dogmen are from the moon and or near the moon, and that the reason the moon draws them out is because it's basically their home, or like I said, something that reminds them of their home. Have you ever heard that? It's pretty interesting.
That's a good point, and I think it ties into what I just said about the off-world stuff. Could these things, some of these things, be not natives here to this planet, but something else from other dimensions, off-world? And of course, that's the way they travel between worlds, would be dimensions. But these things have been brought here for a reason. The hypothesis is if they don't belong in our natural order of nature, especially something like Dogman, they would have to, hypothesis-wise, be from some other realm, some other dimension, some other existence other than what we have here. That's an interesting thing to think about. Could they not be natives, but from aliens to a certain extent? And we call them aliens more or less because they just don't belong here. You know what I'm saying? They're from somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an interesting look at that. I've gone deep into some of that stuff. And there are some reports of these things acting very much like scouts, like scouting parties would be sent out to watch things or bring back things or whatever the situation. And some of these people that are going missing in some of these areas could be abducted by these scouting parties. And some of their bases may be underground, definitely. But I think some of this could be tied into off-world aliens as well, and they would be probably the scouting parties, you might say, that they send out to do things. That would be the perfect vehicle in which to snatch people, and do that. And of course, I think a lot of the times that we have to look at this, a lot of the times people go missing in these areas, they are being used for slave labor. Okay, that's why a lot of them are not just trafficking, but slave labor as well. And the slave labor may not only be on this planet, but it can be off-world as well. That's why maybe a lot of these people are going missing, and especially young people, because that's the kind of people, you wouldn't put old people in mines or whatever it is you're doing. You go for the younger people. That's it. And I think we need to correlate some of these missing things with age and see exactly what's going on age-wise with some of these things. Because I believe there is no doubt at all, really, that they're being used for something. If not for food, they're being used as tools, or maybe both. Well, we know. But I think this ties into a lot of stuff that relates to maybe some off-world activity that's going on with it. And it's very interesting to look at. You hear a lot about the secret space program. You hear a lot of supposed whistleblowers that come out and say, yeah, we had a play based on the moon. We had it based on Saturn. We go to these places, and they don't use rocket ships to do that. They use wormholes or portals, as we call them, to travel. And so you can travel vast distances by using portals. So it makes sense when you think about it. But yeah, you have to wonder if there's a tie-in to a lot of this stuff. Because if you look at it, Kenny, since we as domesticated people have domesticated and manipulated dogs to the point that we have like over 300 breeds of dogs, okay? I think higher civilizations would have something like the pets that we have, but we have working dogs here on this planet too. And it's a possibility. What if Dogman is really a working dog or some other entity? That's interesting to think about.
Yeah, isn't that very interesting to think about that right there? All great stuff as always from you, but that is a big reason I wanted to bring that up, because it was a pretty interesting thought process when it was presented to me, but obviously I don't really dive into that realm. I know when I'm doing work with the North America Dogman Project and Jody Cook and stuff, that they really like to break it down into the 3 separate categories: animal, flesh and blood, paranormal, or from outer space, or extraterrestrial, like you said, could be inner Earth, etc. And we try to make sure that people are properly able to gear in the directions that they need to. Meaning, if someone thinks that they saw a baboon or a giant baboon, then I can feel pretty comfortable sitting down, and speaking to them and such. But then obviously if something is more paranormal or extraterrestrial based, I'm going to send it off to individuals such as yourself. But just an interesting thought for sure, because I had never heard of it, and doesn't mean I necessarily subscribe to it, but it means, wow, all right. So as I listened, pretty interesting for sure.
Sometimes it's good to think outside the box once in a while, because you may pick up on some other attributes of things. I see it in a different, perspective on things. I'm not subscribing to that myself, but it's interesting to think about. And maybe, a possibility, but it's good to do outside the box. I mean, it's a very good scientific thing to do, to go outside the box from time to time and take a bigger look at what, you're looking at.
Yes, 1000%, because you can't always just look inside the box. You got to look outside, you got to look around it, underneath it. And that's what I always try to do for sure. Especially as a journalist, it's important to just bring up things that have merit to the topic. And I mean, it doesn't necessarily, as you and I just said, mean that we ourselves have to subscribe to it. But if there's analytical data pointing in that direction that it needs to be looked at, then it needs to be looked at. And if people don't look at it, that's when you fall into the realm of, the bad science, the bad journalism, etc.
Absolutely, and I think this thing with the missing people, though, and that is a very deep rabbit hole that you go into, definitely. And it is a thing that is ongoing. It's happening. You've known good researchers that turn up, just go missing, and just regular people. They were camping or whatever. They go missing. What's going on with that? So there are different attributes that you look at, and I think one of them is the fact that maybe there is something out there hunting the human race, and it is using us for body parts and for food. You never know. It's a possibility, but something is out there, definitely. I think it could be something along the lines of what I've talked about before with cryptid eggs. It's a very unknown factor that we have to look at, but it is fascinating.
Yeah, fascinating, but also pretty terrifying, because as an artist and somebody with a very creative and hyper imagination, it would be absolutely terrifying to be looking in the eyes and the jaws of something as it consumed you. And I mean, I really hope I'm never put in a situation like that, knock on wood. But as an artist, whenever I create things or do anything, I try to put myself in the situation more or less of how it would have felt or how it would have occurred to those individuals. And to think of that is just straight up terrifying, because what are you going to do against just anything that's heavily up to take you out? I mean, you made a good reference, as did I. You had said, the movie The Gray with Liam Neeson, and I had mentioned The Edge with Anthony Hopkins. Both of those right there. We're not even talking about anything extraterrestrial or cryptid. We're just talking about wolves and a giant bear. And one of the scenes in The Edge that forever just sticks with me is when that guy ends up slicing his leg, when he's trying to make a spear later on in the camp, when that giant bear just picks him up by his leg and is just whipping him around. I mean, literally, that gives you probably as close to a real depiction of what would happen to you if that was occurring. And also, as you stated, same thing with like in the movie The Gray, for example. There's a couple brutal scenes in that with the wolves. It's absolutely terrifying.
I've actually seen people who have been mauled by bears, and it is not a pretty sight, definitely. But the claws do more damage in some ways than the teeth. The teeth go deep, very deep bites, because the bear has a big, very big, large mouth. Okay, and they're very deep bites. But the claws, they really, really do a lot of damage. And most of the time, when somebody's mauled by a bear, or even wolves or lions, uh, when the claws do that to them, they usually bleed to, you know. But that might be a godsend, because who wants to die being eaten up? while you're dying. That would be a horrific way to go. Okay, definitely. And so it might be good if you lost consciousness, lost enough blood that you don't know what happens later.
Yeah, absolutely brutal stuff. And a lot of people don't realize that the infection aspects is huge. Like you just mentioned, an interesting and terrifying fact that I was introduced to is, well, surviving the initial attack is the main thing. I mean, a shark has razor blades for teeth. You're in the water. We don't swim that well. It's not the best odds. But if you do survive that and it doesn't take out per se an artery, which is usually the majority of the reason people are unalived because they end up bleeding out before they're to shore or before somebody can stop that. All right, let's get rid of all that though. Say that doesn't happen. Say it just takes a bite into your thigh and those teeth penetrate your bone. That's almost a 100% sentence of no longer existing because of the bacteria in the mouth of the shark gets inside of your bones and they can't do anything about that. Terrifying.
That's an interesting point, definitely. And here's another thought on that: when they draw blood, whether it be on land or in the water, like the shark, when they draw blood, they seem to have an effect upon them. It seems to madden them. It's almost like a narcotic in a way for them. It gets them wilder. That smell of blood. When the more blood there is, it seems like they get wilder and more, destructive that way. Especially sharks. Sharks will do that very bad in the water. If you shed blood in the water, you will have usually more than one shark to contend with. That's the way that goes. They hunt in packs like wolves.
Yeah, pretty messed up. And that also reminds me and makes me think of people that are stuck in the ocean and just getting attacked like that. Terrifying. Don't get me wrong, being attacked by a cryptid obviously would be scary too, but I don't really know what's worse. I mean, if you're going out and there's nothing you can do about it, it's a catch 22. Is it worse to get demolished by a dogman, or is it worse to be attacked by the grizzly bear where it starts eating you alive? Maybe the dogman unalives you immediately so you don't go through that trauma.
Definitely, there are supposed things like the werewolf that we've talked about so much in the past. The werewolf I've talked about is that it's more like a psychotic. He goes just crazy. He's very off center. Okay, he's very wild in that state because he has sort of a demonic power like to him, and that's what's driving him. And of course, when he gets your scent and gets on your trail, he doesn't stop usually until he gets to you. And here's the interesting thing we need to think about. There are a lot of reports of people being followed and harassed by dogmen, following them home, being seen in their backyard and all that. It's very much like the werewolf on the trail. It's very interesting to think about what's going on with that. Can you be haunted by dogmen? Definitely. And there are even stories of dogmen appearing in people's houses. Okay, we've got home invasions here. Okay. These things appear in people's houses. They look through the windows. They stand on the porch. Dogman is not just something way out in the woods. They can be in your neighborhood. That's the interesting aspect of it.
Dang, gnarly stuff right there for sure. Because one thing that nobody can refute is the fact that A, people are missing. And I mean, that's not good, okay? Anywhere from 1,100 to 2,400 people go missing yearly. Around 5% are found. Yikes. Can't really refute that. It's happening near cave systems, within national forests. Can't refute that. Now we have a science team that has footprints and vocalizations and all kinds of interesting things that, again, don't fall into normal animal behavior. Can't refute that. But after those things I just named, there is nothing I, at the moment, can really fully myself verify to prove per se that a dogman exists outside of the strange vocalizations and tracks we have, etc. But again, the first three things I said though can't be refuted. I mean, people are missing, cave systems, national forests. So whether or not anyone wants to think outside of the box more than that, that's their prerogative. But at the end of the day, those three things are happening. So what's taking them? Most people don't think that it's potentially a cryptid. Some people do. Other people think it's known predators. Other people think those predators wouldn't do it. There's a lot going on. I mean, there's a lot of different great opinions and hypotheses and theories and things. So there's probably a lot going on. Yet that's what makes it kind of hard as well to totally figure out what it is, you know? I mean, per se, is the Dogman just like an animal, more or less, meaning it's going to take advantage of situations and just, you know, do what it has to do? Whereas people that are highly trained or highly sick in the head and highly trained could go out in the woods, basically, more or less, and use it as a hunting ground for sport. I mean, there is historical references that people did that to other people and things. That's what I mean. Who is actually potentially more responsible, you know?
That's true, you know. And one other point about missing people, especially in national parks and all that, there is one interesting factor that kind of runs through most all of the cases. Not all of them. You can't paint them all with the same brush, but there a good many, a very high percentage of these cases, there are never any remains found. Find that, you know, these people are being snatched completely out of their environment for some reason to go somewhere. They are taken, I think, from point A to point B. If you and decompose in the woods, you usually leave a set of bones, and the bones will last a very long time, even if they're scattered by other animals and predators. Bones still remain. Why are we not finding some of these remains of these people? That's an interesting factor to think about.
That's a very interesting fact to think about. And you just made such a great point, though, as well, when touching base on the bones. I can't remember the exact percentage, but I think it was pretty dang low, meaning the odds of finding every animal that has ever existed on Earth, according to these brilliant minds I was listening to, is almost nearly impossible, okay, because of the pristine conditions you really need for something to fossilize. I mean, quick example, in the cases with Jordan Grider and Bart Schleisler, they only had little small pieces of bone and vertebrae found to them, and that was in a very short time period that animals or whatever did that. So now having to go hundreds of thousands of years to have something fossilized is really a work of magic if people think about it, because of the perfect conditions you really need. Meaning, say if you and I were out and about as Neanderthals or Denisovians and we're walking by a mudslide, right? And this mudslide hits us, and now we're covered all in this mud, and then we're pushed into a river, and then we're sunk to the bottom of the river, right? So we're basically concealed within this mud. Now, hundreds of thousands of years later, and the riverbed or lake bed is no longer here, when they find us, well, the odds of all of our pieces of our skeleton remaining are probably pretty decent. Whereas when you look at something, for example, like a Allosaurus maybe, or let's go with T-Rex because everyone loves that, much larger being. And if that doesn't happen where it's hitting, like, say, a landslide and it's much larger than you and I, when this thing is no longer alive, everything comes over and scatters its bones all over the place. That's why finding a complete skeleton of something is nearly impossible. I also think it's hard just in general to find anything skeleton, you know?
That's interesting to think about, too, that most of these skeletons that are put together of dinosaurs that you see in museums are really recreations of some of this stuff. Matter of fact, even some of the dinosaur bones were radioactive because they were in or near layers of radium. And you have to be careful how you handle stuff like that. But also, a lot of these displays you see are just recreations of the bones because they don't find all the bones. Most of the time, you know, you have to try to figure out, that's what paleontologists do and all that, try to figure out exactly what bone connects to what bone, you know. And sometimes you have to recreate that because you don't have the whole system. And a lot of these things that you see in museums are definitely recreations of these things. But you know, over the years, I've been asked a very interesting question: why don't we find Bigfoot bones? Why don't we find Dogman bones? It could be the fact that they actually bury their dead. And I have actually heard reports of people who supposedly stumbled upon Sasquatch graveyards, and that they were driven out by other Sasquatch and stuff like that. Fascinating stuff when you think about it. Do they bury their, you know? And if they do, that's why we don't find the bone. That would make a lot of sense.
That's great stuff right there. And especially if they're using caves and areas that we don't necessarily explore the most. A lot of people don't realize there are a decent amount of animals that bury their unalived ones. Primates especially do that, meaning it's been seen with gorillas and larger apes basically using like foliage, more or less, like coffins. And in some of the cases where we've had reports, per se, one was injured or shot or maybe unalived, the rest of the squad of Dogmen came back and grabbed it. But here are some interesting ones where you're going to be probably not too surprised, but some of them might catch you off a little bit. So, all right, elephants. Shouldn't really surprise anybody. Elephants are super smart. They bury their unalived. Chimpanzees, which I was just mentioning, some of the larger primates. Well, chimps are also super smart. There you go. Ants and termites come back for their deceased and no longer with them and then bury them. Super cool. A lot of dogs have been seen doing this, especially wild dogs. And foxes are also known to bury their victims of their friends or loved ones too. So right there, I mean, yeah, those are all smart animals, but it's proof that animals do that behavior. So what you had just mentioned isn't really too far-fetched to think or outside of the logic. I mean, if I'm just able to name those ones right there, I'm sure my science team also, that, you know, the biologist we have and the zookeeper would be able to name more, you know?
You know, by the way, when you were mentioning that, I'm thinking about a German Shepherd I used to have, and he hated cats, and he would kill cats and bury them. And the only thing you would find would be their tails sticking up out the ground. And I found a lot of cats like that, unfortunately. He unalived them, a lot of cats. He did not like cats. And one of them, he even had him on a chain. I had him on a leash and left him. He even did, I don't know how he did that one. Or I've often said it might have been the cat committing suicide. I don't know. But anyway, it's very interesting that animals have that instinct to bury things. Definitely. And you know, that may be nature's way too of keeping disease down. You know, the bodies can cause certain diseases and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and if they come back and handle them or whatever the situation, so that may be part of their instinct as well to bury those things.
Super interesting. And I also know that hyenas, wolves, and crocodiles are a big reason that there is a specific depth that you need to bury unalive people at, because all of those animals gladly dig them up to consume them.
I would definitely love to find a Bigfoot graveyard. That would be terrific.
Huh. That'd be scary. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's actually a decent movie. I believe it's called Big Legend or something. Again, a B flick. But this Sasquatch slash wild man takes this guy's wife or fiance and consumes her. So he then gets cleared from a mental institution after telling them that yes, he accepts it was a bear, but obviously he never did accept it was a bear, because when he tried to tell them it was a Bigfoot, they all thought he was nuts. Goes back out there. Man, there's a part where he's with this hunter, and it's not a Bigfoot graveyard, but it's like an area that I always said that probably exists somewhere in a cave, where there was backpacks and bones everywhere and feces from where this thing was just eating and then just like discarding waste. It also reminds me of the movie The Descent inside of that too in the cave. And that's what I try to explain to people is we know less about the caves than we do outer space and the oceans.
Exactly what cats are doing with litter boxes. Very much like that. They have a tendency to hide their skin. A lot of animals do that, by the way.
Yeah, like you said, because it's a way to cover up their tracks, no pun intended. And I know large cats hate showing footprints. Some more dominant predators like grizzly bears or pack-oriented things like wolves tend not to care as much, but solitary predators such as most of the large felines do anything in their power to not show their tracks, meaning they'll go over wood, logs, rocks, etc., grass to make sure that, hey, I'm not showing my tracks off. And I do know that our tracker, Nuxium, had a case where he saw just one Sasquatch footprint. So he was like, all right, well, it's not like there was a one-legged Sasquatch that just poof appeared. How could this have happened? And he realized that the way the tree was near, that he, or this maybe could have been a she Sasquatch too, came down, put one foot on the ground and grabbed something and then went back up into the trees. And that's what I'm meaning as well too, whether it's Dogman or Sasquatch and things. I think the tree systems, or even feral people, or even people that aren't necessarily considered feral but are just nefarious, people are always looking down when you're in the woods, right? Everyone's always looking at their feet and things, or straight ahead or around them. You got to look up. Makes me wonder how many times people have just walked under things and never even seen what was up there. Because I know mountain lions are all about that too, you know?
And another point about the missing people too, that we need to look at that kind of ties in with this stuff. There is a definite, and I think a well-known fact that, especially among the Native Americans, that Bigfoot actually, the cat snatches women out in the woods. I think they're doing it for sexual and breeding purposes. This is a well-known fact with the Native Americans. Supposedly, there are many cases where this has supposedly happened with a lot of so-called missing people, especially women. So I always caution women if they're going on Bigfoot hunts or going out in the woods to be very cautious, be very careful. Because even the Native Americans did not want their women alone in the woods because of this situation. I think a lot of people may be, snatched up because of this. Bigfoot may have a need to breed with humans for a certain thing to become what it is. The interesting thing we've got to think about, what if we are very closely related to Sasquatch in many ways? They definitely would have kind of urges like that to do these things. So it makes sense when you think about it, but it needs to be a very cautionary thing too. We have to be very cautious out there, especially women at certain times of the month when they're out in these woods. Not just Sasquatch, but other animals may pick up on them too, scent-wise. So you have to be very, very careful how you approach this, especially if you're a woman.
Dang, creepy stuff right there. And to add a little bit of seasoning to what you just said, I know for a fact because our science team introduced it to myself and I did some additional research that certain animals such as coyotes and potentially maybe even wolves, as their packs get smaller, the females put off a pheromone that basically alerts, hey, we're way too low in numbers. And almost every coyote now has some sort of domesticated dog lineage in them because they're mating with domesticated dogs. So in actuality, when people go in and try to say clear out coyotes because they're a problem, I don't know. I love all animals. I'm not really about that. In actuality, all they're doing is potentially causing coyotes to lose their fear of people because they're breeding with domesticated dogs now, which means they're coming closer. And also that next generation is going to fear humans even less. And now a lot of them are suburbanized, which means they're going to view being around people or even humans themselves potentially as a food source. So yeah, pretty creepy, man.
And for a long time, some scientists claimed that didn't happen. But we know different now. You have coy wolves,
Mm-hmm.
you have coy dogs, because of this. And like I said, there are even reports. This is very strange of blue coyotes that have been seen in California, even with blue eyes. Where's that coming from? Could they have, bred with huskies at one time or another? Or got into some kind of chemical thing or whatever. We've got to remember this about coyotes. When they get very hungry, they encroach closer on mankind. They
Mm-hmm.
like to stay away from us because they know we're their number one predator on them. But when they get hungry, all bets are off.
Yeah, creepy stuff right there for sure. And just the thought, that's what I'm saying. If people want nightmare fuel, it's out there. They don't need to make up hoaxes and things or listen to clickbait. I mean, everything we're speaking about is just nightmare fuel. And as we start to tie this up, I always use this example. One time I didn't speak to this woman. I was watching her speak, and unfortunately, she was still extremely disfigured because she was attacked by a bear. And the bear started to eat portions of her and then buried her in a nearby cache. Okay. Well, her friend had escaped after trying to fight the bear off, even though the bear started to maul her. A dog basically intervened more or less. This woman got away, told other people what had happened. They came back with a search crew. And, well, to a straight up horror movie, they found the cache. As they're thinking this woman has to be unalived in the cache, she's basically moaning and groaning and things. And yeah, she survived, but this bear had eaten a lot of the muscles off and like her face and her arms and stuff. Creepy, man.
That can happen. Like I say, I've seen people attacked by these bears. You can imagine what a wolf would do too, definitely. Uh, you're looking at an animal that has a very strong back. I don't know exactly what the measurement is for the strength of the back, but it's something. I have seen police dogs do things you would not believe a dog could do. And if dogs can do that, definitely wolves can, if
Mm-hmm.
need be. And like we talked about one time with these super smart, intelligent wolves that may be out there. That's another factor you got to think about. Um, they definitely would be a predator you would not want to mess with because they cover their tracks like we were talking about earlier. Certain animals know how to do that, and these super intelligent wolves would do that. They could cover their tracks. They can hide. They know how to stalk us better than the average wolf would, and that's a scary thought.
Yeah, that is so creepy right there. It is extremely, insanely nightmare fuel right there. To just imagine that. I mean, one wolf coming at you is pretty insane. Two wolves would be even scarier, and now a pack would be absolutely mortifying because what are you going to do? I actually recently, as we start to tie this up, heard of a case I believe was up in Canada in an area where wolves had not seen humans for a very long time. A man of science was up there just scoping out the area and taking some notes for other people, and he was hunted down and consumed by a pack of wolves. Yikes. So, yeah, just the thought of that is mortifying.
It is, and one time I remember out in the woods, not very many years ago, when I was much younger, I was actually surrounded by a pack of wild dogs, very much like a pack of wolves. And luckily, I was able to scare them off and get away from them. But it is a bad situation when you get in something like, especially when it's a pack. The lone wolf is very dangerous, and the fact it is very wild card. In other words, it can do anything and may do, to do anything it wants to. But the pack is like 12 or 15 times worse than the lone wolf.
Yes, is that not the truth, my friend? Well, Mr. Carroll, you are a very busy individual and have many other things to attend to. Is there anything else you would like to touch base on tonight, my friend?
I think we pretty well covered it, but I would say just be very cautious to everyone out there that goes. I'm talking about the researchers, seasoned researchers, just as much as I'm talking about amateurs. Be very, very careful. Always keep your eyes open, keep your head on a swivel, and watch on your six, because you never know what you're going to run into. The situation, what's around the next bend. or what may fall down on you from the tree. You never know, so you got to be ready for anything when you're out there. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just saying you need to be cautious. Don't give in to fear on it, but be cautious because they can smell fear. Okay, it's a good idea that if you go out in the woods, not to be fearful and not to make yourself a victim, because a lot of things, there's a lot of eyes on you out there, and if they see you as a victim, you might not come back.
Yikes, is that not the truth? Well, to the Midnight Society, this will be the conclusion of our meeting for the early hours of the morning. Dr. Carroll has things he must attend to, and if you are interested in keeping up with what he is covering, check out the link in the description, which will bring you right over to his good old thread. Also, you can find his thread under my Midnight Society suggestion list. Or you can just watch the good old playlist we have together and catch up on our older content and watch out for the new stuff that is coming out because we have plenty of things cooking up in the oven. Well, Dennis, thanks for hanging out tonight, man.
My pleasure. It's always a pleasure.
Ooh, I do enjoy every single one of you tuning in, and I do adore all of you. If you do like my content, please subscribe, share it, feed the algorithm, and yes, the sun is rising. I will catch you when the darkness comes back.